Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 152, and we're going to cover the book of Ezra. We're in a new book, and we're in a shorter book, and it's an exciting book. So I hope I can give it justice for you. So I know a few people have been tracking along with me, and some are in my reading plan, and I'm working with the Bible apps to get my reading plan, Devo with Uncle Theo, and so these audios can go along with them. And Lord willing, we'll be able to go deeper and deeper every time. And I'll be able to consistently have a special guest on with me so you won't get bored with my voice. And Lord willing, I'll try to get my good friend Abner Chou on here. Dr. Chou was my Old Testament professor. And man, he pretty much taught me everything I know about the Old Testament. I literally had to go up to him one time and tell him, bro, I think I pretty much memorized all your lectures. So if I ever plagiarize you, don't hold it against me. And he laughed and he said, Theo, you have a lifetime pass of plagiarism from me. And that's all I needed to hear. Because to be honest with you, I pretty much memorized all of his course lectures. And I can never tell whether it's my thought or his that I'm giving to you. But nothing we say is novel anyway. We're just regurgitating something we've heard or were inspired by from somebody else anyway. So I guess it all works out. We're in Ezra. We covered Kings, which was horizontal, and Chronicles, which was vertical. And Kings was showing Israel that no human king can unite Israel or save Israel. No man is strong enough or pure enough. You need something or someone divine. And we knew that, right? Because even with Josiah, it said he loved the Lord, his God, with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. But then we got an extra qualifier. It said, but he could not stay the wrath of God. And we're like, whoa, now wait a minute. We didn't know about this qualifier. This king must be able to stop the wrath of God that is abiding over humanity from the sin of Adam. Who can do this? And so that's what brings into the argument, we're going to need someone divine. And so how does the Old Testament end? Guess what? Ezra is our season finale. Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther are pretty much the end of our historical books. And what have we seen? We've walked through the entire Old Testament. Remember, it was very simple. We saw the enmity between God and Satan, and we've been tracking that all throughout Scripture. We've seen God raise up one man from Ur of the Chaldeans from Babylon and called him to have a great name, to get a land, to have a seed and a blessing. And they wanted to build a Tower of Babel. God turns that on his head and said, no, I'll bring a man from Babel to bring the seed through. And so we've seen that. We've gone through the patriarchs. We've gone through the leadership of Moses and Joshua. We saw the dark time of Judges, where Israel got to the point as worse as it has gotten, where people wouldn't even go through Israel unless they had a military escort. It got worse to the point where you couldn't distinguish Israel from Sodom and Gomorrah. You remember how that book ended? A man hacking up his concubine into pieces and sending them to the 12 tribes, civil war, kidnapping, murder, and our book just ends like that. Then we get to Ruth and we finally see that the seed is going to flow through this union between Ruth and Boaz, and they become the great-grandfather of David. We get 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, each reign for 40 years. And then in 930 BC, we get a crisis. Solomon dies, and the Old Testament is basically split into 2 halves. We get the united kingdom and the divided kingdom. And so stuff was starting to get complex to us. In fact, it was hard for me to work through the Chronicles because I'm like, man, am I losing everybody? Are they still with me? Because I'm going over these things, and I hope it hadn't gotten too complex and we don't need to go back and pick up somewhere where we've gotten lost or we've gotten in the fog. But remember, they split it over the tax issue, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and we get the split with the northern and the southern kingdom, 20 different kings in the southern kingdom, but only one dynasty, that is of David. And that's the genealogy we get of Matthew. It's called the Messianic line. And so notice why God is tracking this stuff so well with genealogy. Tell me where Buddha died. No one knows. But tell me where Jesus died. Jerusalem, Golgotha, on a cross, in a tomb. Where was he born? Palestine, Bethlehem, in a manger. This is serious historical study because God is tracking his seed for you so you can place your faith in something historical and so you can distinguish the enmity between his seed and Satan's seed, because you saw Satan very active amongst the kings. He pretty much had the northern kings on lock, and he was working through them. He created the Umride conspiracy through them. He raised up Omri, Ahab, Jezebel, their daughter Athaliah, who tried to destroy the house of Judah. She almost did it. And the Davidic line, the Messianic line, was hanging on by a string in Joash. And that's what we've been seeing. But we'll go back to the prophets. But the prophets go along with these. And Jeremiah has been screaming, you will be taken into exile. And that's an important word for the Old Testament. He said the exile will be 70 years. And that's where this book picks up. This is the story of those who return. And so you say, okay, Ezra and Nehemiah is the story of the people who return. What happened to the people who didn't return? Aha, good question. That's the story of the book of Esther. So Cyrus makes a decree in 538. Isaiah talks about this. He speaks of this man 150 years before he was born. So look at how powerful our God is. He doesn't have to look at birth certificates and obituaries and tombstones. He sets birthdays and death days, even to the point where he can tell his prophet when the man who will take Israel out of captivity will be born. And then we get ironic retaliation, because remember, where did Israel come from? They come from the loins of Abraham. Where did Abraham come from? Babylon. Remember the Tower of Babel? God brings somebody from there to rebuke them. What is God doing with sending them back to Babylon? It's like he's sending Abraham back to Babylon. Those are his people. He's telling them, I'm sending you back to where you came from because you didn't obey me. We're starting over again. We're going back to Genesis. So think about that, people. God sent Israel back to Babylon because that's where they came from. You got to see the beauty and the geniusness in this of our God. So if you know that, turn to Exodus chapter 1 with me. This is the first year of Cyrus. This is about 536. It's the same wording as the end of 2 Chronicles. And so I need you to see that Ezra is a continuation of Chronicles. Listen to this. It says, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout the realm and also put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, said. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with freewill offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem. And there you have it. That's the same language we heard from the end of 2 Chronicles. So what's our theme from Ezra? It's God rebuilds his nation. God continues his relationship with his people. We thought it was on the line. The temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, but God has now raised up a man. He said he would 150 years before the man was even born. He raises him up to rebuild his nation. He says, look, we're starting over. I'm bringing you back out of Babylon. I'm done teaching you this lesson. You were in captivity. Let's continue our relationship. You gotta learn a lesson there. Listen, God will deal with you. If you're his child, a faithful son and daughter, he will chastise you left and right. You may be asking for tangible things. You may be asking for possessions, for positions, for performance, and God will put all that stuff on hold until you recognize that the most important thing is him being in his presence and conforming into the image of his son. Don't forget the lesson that God turned an 11-day journey into a 40-year journey for one word: disobedience. And that's what happened here. He added 30 years to that 40-year journey. They went into captivity for 70 years because of that one word, disobedience. And we like to play around with that word. I talked to 2 people this week in counseling, and they said, Theo, it's hard to obey God. I'm only human. Everybody's around me sinning. Why can't I sin? And my counsel to them, everybody around you isn't God's children. He's going to shut down the program for you. Those other people can live, be happy, prosper, close on houses, get new cars, but he's going to shut the operation down for you. He's going to put his foot on your neck into the concrete if you choose to say, why can't my disobedience come with me? It can't. God says, without holiness, no one shall see the Lord. So they're rebuilding the temple. We're starting from scratch, just like we're going back to the times of Abraham, but they're still a nation. But there's a huge roadblock. There's a problem internally and externally with his people. And this book will end on a cliffhanger. It's almost continued to be continued. And so this book cannot be the end. So it forces us to look forward. To look forward to what? The New Testament. By design, Ezra is going to demand the Messiah. It's going to demand Christ. Because remember, these are our last books of the Bible. Everything else we'll go through are fill-ins. The Psalms, the Proverbs, the Ecclesiastes, we've gone through all of that already. That's just literature by people we've already studied. The prophets are just people who were raised up alongside the kings who we've already studied. So I want you to pat yourself on the back. You basically finished the Old Testament if you've gotten this far. All we're going to do with the rest of the books, once we finish Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, we're just going to go back and color in between the lines. You have no more history to learn. All you're going to do is go fill in what you already know. So I want you to be encouraged. When you make it to Ezra, you finish. Like, that's encouraging. We're done with history. Now we're going to go back and just fill in some things that were happening along what we already read. And how did we get here? You remember there was a guy by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. The Chronicles end that way. What country is he from? Babylon. So you got Nebuchadnezzar. He's got Babylonian control. This is around the time of Daniel and Ezekiel. See that? We're going to study these guys, but we've already studied Nebuchadnezzar. We're just going to learn more about that time when we get to the prophets. Then he has a son by the name of Belteshazzar. That's Nebuchadnezzar's son. He's going to be the guy that had the handwriting on the wall. Daniel's alive during his time. He actually goes beyond him because they actually have a conversation in Daniel 5. Then after this, who comes the power? The Medo-Persians. So now we got the Medo-Persians, and you get a guy by the name of Cyrus. And that's the guy that's given the decree that we just read about in Ezra chapter 1. And Daniel is alive during this time too. And Cyrus dies and his son takes over. And he's a jerk. Everybody's happy when he dies. And in fact, during his reign, people are trying to figure out how to kill him. So after Cyrus, after his son dies, you get a guy by the name of Darius or Darius. And remember him? We're still in the Medo-Persian. And by the way, Daniel is still alive during the time of Darius. And then after a long series of events, you have a guy by the name of Xerxes. Now, Xerxes is the king during the time of Esther. He's the guy from the movie 300. Remember the Spartans? That fad, that's a fictional movie based behind this man who is a real man. And then you have his son, the son of Xerxes by the name of Artaxerxes. And in the time of Artaxerxes, that is actually the time of a dude named Ezra and another guy by the name of Nehemiah. So you got the timeline. You don't have to memorize all of these dates, but I'm going to give them to you just so you can keep them handy. So remember the final Babylonian exile, it happened in 3 waves. The last one was 586, and Cyrus gives the decree, and Israel returns in 538. Chronicles is around 530 to 940. Esther is around 483. Ezra and Nehemiah are 458 and 445. And so that's our timeline. And so Ezra is basically a panoramic snapshot that shows the whole period from Cyrus all the way to Artaxerxes. And so Ezra really isn't even around when the temple is rebuilt. The temple was already rebuilt when Ezra the man comes home. And so it's going to get weird because Esther kind of takes place after some things have already happened in Ezra. And before Ezra ends, it's like the book of Job. Job takes place after some things have happened in Genesis, but before Genesis ends, which is why Job is a very early book. And so this timeline to help you understand Ezra is a snapshot of all these events, because it could get pretty confusing and you could think things are contradictory or illogical. And I don't want that to happen for you. Think of the book of Ezra as a panoramic snapshot of a long period of time. And so remember, temple is a big deal. Solomon's temple was beautiful. And so did you notice what I read in chapter 1? It said, in the first year of Cyrus, in order to complete the word of the Lord from who? From Jeremiah. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of who? Cyrus. And you should say, wow, this is truly Proverbs 21, that the king's heart is like channels of water in the hands of God, and he turns it whichever way he wishes. God changes the thinking of Cyrus. He changed foreign policy to do what no other nation had done before and placed Cyrus in power and in position to do this, to free his people, because this is how powerful and how sovereign God is. He'll manipulate kingdoms and kings and policies for his people. See, God isn't a nice God. God is a chesed God. This is what loyal love and covenant loyalty does. It'll change the world to bring about his purposes. And this is what God is saying. He gives them the commission. He gives them all the material, and he stirs the people up to do this. In verse 5, God is saying, I love you. I want you. He's pursuing his people. In verses 7 through 11, all the items are restored. He changes the world, and people are and that takes us to chapter 2. And the people are regathered. That's what we see in verses 1 through 37. And you say, okay, Theo, what do I do with this list of people? This chapter is a whole list of people. You read it, but you read it with this in mind. You realize this is God pulling his people back together so he can engage in relationship with them. Remember, they were in captivity, and you read it and you see the beauty of the geography. He's bringing them back to Israel, and this should blow your mind. He is really bringing Israel back again. Not just the people from the capitals, but from Jerusalem, from the rural parts, from the big city. God is saying, I want a relationship with all y'all, with all of you. He's bringing back people who actually care about doing it right. Not just people from every place, but people who care about doing it right. These people were actually worried about including the wrong people in the priestly line, and these people want to get it right. But there's a problem. When you look at the text and scan through the number, Ezra 2:64 through 67, look at verse 67. What's the number? How many people return? 42,000. Now, is that truly a lot for a nation compared to the numbers we were just looking at in Exodus and in Numbers, where we were saying the estimated 2 to 3 million people? It's really not a lot of people, is it? This is less than the people of one tribe in Numbers. How is this more than the sand of the seashore? It's not. And that's why this is continued to be continued. But let's keep digging deep in Ezra and learning about the people returning and seeing God track his seed, take care of his people. But remember, it's not going to happen without a fight, because of Genesis 3:15, there is enmity between God and Satan. Satan is about to strike. He's about to try to stop the work. You're going to see with Nehemiah, he's going to send enemies when they're trying to build a wall. He's going to attack politically. He's going to attack militarily. And that's just how it always goes. And which is why that's what's going to happen to you in your life. That roaring lion is going to attack you. So you need to be vigilant. You need to be sober-minded, and you need to be alert. Stop playing church. Stop playing Christian. This is serious stuff. But God will take care of you because he loves you. Let's continue to walk in faithfulness and look forward to catching you next time. You guys take care. Peace.